So California has had microstamping, as I heard earlier, and they've had it since 2007. They just redid a bill in 2020. Do we know how many cases that involved illegal shootings, aggravated assaults by a firearm, that were solved with the use of microstamping since 2007?
What? As we've talked about before, the bill did not go into effect because the manufacturers refused to issue new models. So we can't use any data from California on the issues you're questioning about.
Is there any data that's available?
Not from California.
Is there any data from anywhere else besides studies? I'm talking real life practice.
There are plenty of there's plenty of evidence on the efficacy of microstamping and the ability of law enforcement to use the casings to track the gun.
Can you give me some examples of that?
I don't have examples right here, but there's plenty of evidence I can get for you.
Well, could you just rattle off a little bit of types of evidence that you may have? Is there studies? How many studies are involved? Maybe how many rounds were fired in each study? Did they find any deficiencies?
Where's my FAQ?
Do we know if there's, as you're looking for that, I just want to add this question to that. Do we know if there's a number of rounds that would have to be fired to determine that they are accurately obtaining the microstamp number?
Well, there have been many peer-reviewed studies that have found that microstamp-equipped firearms accurately marked thousands of rounds fired across a variety of different firearm models, and that the microstamp codes were legible on over 90% of cartridge cases tested.
Can you tell me who did that study? Was that the manufacturer of the microstamping?
No, these are peer-reviewed studies. I can get you who the author was at a later date.
So peer-reviewed microstamping analysis. Do we know how many microstamping experts there may be in the world?
I failed to see the relevance of that. We have tasked DCJS with determining the viability of this technology.
Okay, so the reason why I asked that, I'm going to tie this into drug recognition experts that do DWI and driving under the influence. I talked about that tremendously during debate several years ago. And the reason why I bring that up is because drug recognition experts have a special talent and training to testify in court about how they obtain that information. It costs roughly $60,000 to train each drug recognition expert. To put that into perspective, the NYPD that has 35,000 police officers have 16 DREs. The reason why I tie that in is if we are going to use experts to testify in court based on microstamping, how are they going to be certified as experts in the court of law if we do not have enough experts across the nation or the world to give that training and to certify those officers? That's where we come into a conflict of, if we even have microstamping, how can we prove it? Because let's face it, this isn't going to be like CSI where we're going to solve a crime in 40 minutes. We need to have the funding. So is there funding in this bill for that training?
This bill does not have funding attached to it.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I said this bill does not have funding attached to it.
Okay, so getting back to that question about how many experts we have in microstamping across the country. Do we know how many? And how many actually did the peer review of that study?
You know, there is a company called Tac Lab, and in 2018, it began developing a machine to produce large numbers of firing pins equipped with microstamping technology. And the tool was introduced to the market for firearm manufacturers. Firearm manufacturers now have machines available to do exactly what this bill would require them to do.
So that company that did the study, was that someone who invented or maybe sells microstamping equipment?
What is your question?
So the company that did that study in 2018.
Well, it's Tac Lab, which develops a machine.
So Tech Lab, who we're basing our study information on and data of 90% accuracy, are the ones that make the machines and sell them to the gun manufacturers?
You know, I think you're trying to impugn the people who are trying to help this country get a handle on gun violence by questioning how many people there are. There are people who are expert on this. There are people who have verified. There are peer studies that all show that microstamping technology works. You can fire thousands upon thousands of rounds, and you can still trace, even with partial of the alphanumeric code on the casing, you can still trace it back. So I think a lot of people take comfort in that knowledge because we're looking for solutions here. We're not looking to tear apart tools that law enforcement has asked for.
So I agree with you 100% that we're not looking to tie and take away tools that law enforcement have. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, on the bill, please.
On the bill, sir.
So it is ironic that we just talked about taking away tools from law enforcement to combat gun violence. I stand up here every day talking about the things that we write in this legislation that does not transition to the street the way it's supposed to. 16 and 17-year-olds, we heard about it earlier. I talked about that ad nauseum. We talked about it just a few weeks ago, about selling guns, the presumption, 3 firearms. I gave a nice little scenario to everybody in this chamber. 16 and 17-year-old with 3 firearms. If he has them in his backpack, it should be automatically a presumption that they're for sale now, and he should go to criminal court. But no, he goes to family court because a tool was taken away from law enforcement, which includes prosecutors. It now goes to family court. We see 16 and 17-year-olds lighting up our streets. It's in the news every other day across our state, and we had the opportunity to fix that. I begged you to fix that. The stuff we're talking about today, microstamping, the technology's not there. I said it before. It's not CSI. This isn't a CBS show. We're not going to solve it in 40 minutes. I asked specifically, do we have case studies of actual crimes that were committed and solved with microstamping? We do not. We do not. So what that tells me is we cannot have the experts to testify in court to actually prove that case. The study you just heard about in 2018 is done by the manufacturer of the microstamping machine. A real peer review? Maybe a state should have bought a microstamping machine and actually did the test themselves and not rely on someone that might actually get a bid to implement that. I've been accused of trying to push away the issue to something else just in this debate. I'm not doing that. I'm trying to raise the issues that we can do to fix things that we send from this legislature. That's all I ever do here, is try and improve it, try and make it work better. Because I can tell you, the years that I spent on the streets of New York, patrolling, I wanted the legislature to do the right thing and help me protect our streets. We've gone way past that now. We don't do that. We actually make it more difficult. But we decide that we're going to pass legislation to feel good. Let's stop worrying about feeling good and actually accomplish something. How are we going to get our police officers trained as experts for this? How are we going to get the labs, the technicians, to be certified? It's not even addressed. But you know what? We can hit our green buttons, we can hit our red buttons, we can all walk out the door and say why we did that, why we don't want to support it, why we want to support it. But we actually could maybe get to a place where what we put on paper really turns out to do the things it's supposed to, on the street, in the courtroom. But until that day, I'm going to stand up here every time we discuss these things. Because there is a time that I hope we will come to where we'll be able to have these discussions and fix the necessary changes. But until that day, this is merely fluff. So hopefully you all will join me one day and say, listen, I think we can fix this. I think we can actually add some substance instead of worrying about a press release.